Now, here's a car that I've always been curious about, the WRX, which I thought Subaru ruined. But did they? I'm Nish, you're watching The Word on Cars. Let's find out, shall we? So, Subaru, or Subi, gave us the WRX, or Rexy as we Aussies like to call it, way back in 1992. Back then, the Rexy was based on the Impreza, which remained the platform for the WRX for 3 generations and multiple facelifts until 2015 when Subaru dropped the Impreza name and just called this thing the WRX, because that's what everyone else called it. The WRX was, unsurprisingly, based on the Impreza, made for the World Rally Championship, with WRX standing for World Rally Experimental. Not sure why they didn't just call this thing the WRE, if that was the case, but I digress. The Rexy redefined sports cars because they stayed true to Subaru's WRC heritage. What they gave us was a small, practical sedan with Subaru's symmetrical all-wheel drive system, a smooth turbocharged, horizontally opposed boxer 4-cylinder engine with its hallmark rumble and plenty of ground clearance. And this recipe made the WRX and the more serious STI, which stands for Subaru Technica International, which is Subi's motorsport division, sell like hotcakes over the years. That was until we got this. Technically the 2nd generation, but 5th generation if you include all the Impreza-based models. I, like most people out there, judged the WRX for the way it looked, and Subaru also announced that they would no longer make the STI version, which I think has also impacted the sales of the WRX because the STI was always a yardstick for modifying and tuning the WRX. But as much as I hate to say it, I was wrong to judge this Subi by its metal, because it's still very much a WRX, and I'll explain why later. In terms of model lineup, you can have the WRX in either a sedan or sports wagon, from the base WRX, which is the one to get if you ask me, and I'll explain why later, and around 52.5 grand Aussie, to the RS, GT and TS, which is the most expensive at around 65.5 grand, with a manual or sport Lineartronic automatic gearbox. If you want a manual, you're limited to the lowest spec WRX and WRX RS models in sedan form. And the sports wagons can only be had with the auto, which is a damn shame. And you can have the WRX in 9 different colors, with the sports wagon and sedan variants getting an extra color for each. For anyone looking at the second-hand market, there's cars like this one, which is currently for sale at Blinker here in Melbourne, for under 43 grand in fantastic condition, and you'll not only get the balance of the factory warranty, but Blinker will throw in an additional 3 years just for letting them know that you saw this WRX on The Word on Cars. Can't complain with that. On the design of the Rexy, the styling has grown on me over the last few years. The front end is an evolved version of the 1st generation with slimmer and sharper headlamps with daytime running lights and a more prominent grille compared to the previous model, which is very much Subaru. And just like all other Rexys before this one, there's an air intake on the hood which doesn't just look sporty, it's also functional and rams air straight onto the intercooler that sits on top of the engine to cool the intake charge. The same can also be said for the back end of the Rexy, and although some may say it looks completely different, you can still see hints of the previous model in the design. Aside from the changes to the tail lamps, which also include daytime running lights on the backside, the WRX also gets a shorter and stubbier ducktail spoiler and a whole lot of black trim compared to the previous model that flows into the diffuser and wraps around the quad-tipped exhaust. And while we're back here, so the exhaust isn't going to blow your eardrums, it's muted, which is a shame, but with so many aftermarket exhausts to choose from for that Subaru rumble that we all love, it's an easy fix. Then we have the side of the WRX, which is the most controversial thanks to this cladding Subaru throw-in over the wheel arches. Now, I wasn't a fan of these either, but again, these have grown on me. If you squint, they give the illusion of the WRX having a much higher ride height than it actually does. And these things will stop your paint copping stone chips because at the end of the day, the WRX was built to take on dirt and gravel. Aside from the cladding, the Rexy does get wide brawny fenders on the front and rear, along with side skirts and 18-inch wheels on its corners that look good in this dark finish. And if all of this isn't enough for you, Subaru also offers quite an extensive range of accessories for anyone that wants to personalize the exterior of their WRX for a more STI-esque look. Now, getting into the WRX is no different to most other cars these days. You get a standard issue Subaru key with the Subaru logo to unlock and buttons to lock and pop the boot, which you just need to keep on you when you're grabbing the door handle, which unlocks the WRX. When you're done, touch the marking on the handle to lock up. And for a small car, the doors up front open up plenty wide to get in and out. Once you do step in, you'll find a no-frills interior in the base model of the WRX. I mentioned that this model, in my opinion, is the way to go because this is what the WRX has always been about. No-frills performance. You do get soft touch surfaces here and there with red stitching, but it's mixed in with a fair bit of plastic and fake carbon fiber accents on the doors and steering wheel. Then there's the sports bucket seats, which are trimmed in black and grey cloth with the same red stitching. Both driver and passenger seats need to be manually adjusted, and the base model misses out on the heated front seats. And being bucket seats, they're definitely body hugging, but not extreme, so I'm quite comfortable sitting here. Also, I'm 5'9", and there's enough headroom and legroom and knee room, so most people that are taller than me shouldn't have any issues getting in here and getting comfortable. In front of the driver, the Rexy gets a leather-wrapped sports steering wheel with a flat bottom, more red stitching, and a WRX logo, which is a nice little touch. You also get controls for the usual functions on the steering wheel. This WRX, though, being an earlier base model with a manual transmission, didn't get many of the driver assistance systems like Subaru's EyeSight, which includes adaptive cruise control, active lane keeping, and emergency braking, and Vision Assist, which includes surround view cameras and emergency braking in reverse. So you do get a few blanks on the steering wheel to stare at every time you get behind the wheel. It's analog for those of you out there that want a pure driving experience. You do get blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, basic cruise control and stability control with traction control, which you'll find on another bank of blanks that are for all the safety systems that the high-spec models get. And in front of the steering wheel, there's an analog instrument cluster with dials that look super sporty and a 4.2-inch multifunction screen which shows basic trip information, a boost gauge, audio information and tire pressure monitoring, while under the steering wheel, the WRX gets some proper aluminium sports pedals that look and feel fantastic. And on the topic of screens, the entire WRX range also got this massive portrait 11.6-inch touchscreen, which is easy to use, responsive, and you can customize the screen with shortcuts to your favorite functions, which is neat, with digital radio, Bluetooth phone and audio streaming, and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You do miss out on built-in navigation in the base WRX, but it's nothing that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto can't sort out. The system also gets a 6-speaker stereo that sounds fine, while the high-spec models get a 10-speaker Harman Kardon system. Subaru has also integrated some of the climate controls into the infotainment system, but they've thought this one through and thrown in buttons to adjust temperature, front and rear demisters, along with a couple of dials to control volume and media. And in the high-spec sedan and sports wagon models, the drive mode select is accessed through the infotainment system, and this one, being a base model, doesn't have this functionality. So, the driver is in control of how comfortably, normally, or sportily they want to drive. Then there's the center console where you'll find the gear lever to row through the 6-speed manual gearbox with a collar you lift to go into reverse. In reverse, you do get a reverse camera to see what's behind you. The base model WRX also gets a conventional handbrake, while high-spec models have an electronic handbrake. And while we're here, let's talk about storage. The center console gets a cargo space under the screen with 2 USB ports, a 12-volt power outlet, and an auxiliary audio input, which seems so old school these days, a coin holder behind the gear lever, 2 cup holders that have different depths with a separator that can be removed if you want to stick bigger items in, storage under the center armrest that's felt lined, a good sized glove box on the dashboard, and door bins with bottle holders that'll take fairly big bottles. That wraps up the front. Let me show you what we have in the back. Now, getting into the back seat is made easy thanks to doors that open up fairly wide to keep the WRX practical for the whole family. Once you're in here though, it's pretty much the same as the front in terms of materials back here. There's soft touch surfaces where you'd ordinarily touch or rest your arms, but the rest is plastic. You also get the same cloth seats back here in grey and black with red stitching. The only way to put it is that they're comfortable. Now, what's impressive is that with the driver's seat set to my driving position, I still have loads of knee room, plenty of room to stretch my legs under the front seats, and enough headroom so you could easily carry adults in the back of this car on long drives without any dramas. The seat, being a small car though, isn't hugely wide, so 3 adults side by side would be a tight fit. And there's also a hump on the floor, given this is all-wheel drive, that'll rob floor space from the middle passenger. The Rexy has kids covered though, with top tether mounts across all seats and ISOFIX points for the outboard seats. Convenience-wise, the base model misses out on the heated outboard seats, climate control vents and USB ports that the high-spec models get. Instead, you get more blanks back here. The WRX does get a map pocket behind the front passenger seat, cup holders in the center armrest, and door bins with bottle holders back here, so no frills like the front. Cargo space in the WRX is also decent for what is really a small car. When you pop open the boot lid, only high-spec sports wagons get an electric tailgate. There's 414 litres of space to play with back here, with a minuscule amount of space under the floor and a space saver, so don't expect to stick anything big in there. You can drop the 60-40 split rear seats though for more space or to load in longer items by pulling the latches on the seats. Aside from space to throw your things in, there's nothing exciting going on back here. So, time to get behind the wheel and see what the WRX is all about. So, driving the Subaru WRX. Now, it's a pretty terrible day here in Melbourne. The weather's been horrible. It's been raining since last night, so the roads are a little bit wet. I'm driving through Victoria's Dandenong Ranges, and for anyone that hasn't been to Melbourne before, if you do visit, make sure you check it out because the view is spectacular and the roads are fantastic for driving. Now, this thing is super composed even though the roads are a little wet because of its symmetrical all-wheel drive system. Now, Subaru's had this in their cars for quite a few years now. It's tried and tested, obviously comes from WRC technology, and Subaru knows a thing or two about rallying. This thing is no different. It genuinely is such a fantastically handling car. You definitely get the confidence to put your foot into it around a corner without worrying too much because you know you've got that all-wheel drive grip working for you and keeping you planted. I did a rally session a few years ago and I chose a WRX to do that in. And I couldn't believe the level of grip that car had, whether you were in mud, tarmac, or gravel. Especially in mud, I'd come in hot into a corner and put my foot into it and exit the corner, and it just stuck to the lines. It was unbelievable. So, Subaru knows what they're doing. Now, in terms of suspension, this thing is a little bit on the stiffer side. If you're stepping into this thing from an ordinary car like a Corolla, as an example, you're definitely going to feel it. You do feel some of the bumps and undulations in the road. Going over a pothole, you'll know about it. But I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable. It's not as stiff as some of the more performance-oriented cars out there. You can live with this as a daily driver. And I also think from a handling perspective, because of the car's weight, it's about 1,479 kilograms as a tare weight, and the fact that it has a fairly low center of gravity because of the boxer engine, which sits lower in the engine bay, it's so well balanced. It actually handles corners unbelievably well. For a car at this price point, you shouldn't really expect it to do this, but it does. And that's what the Subaru WRX is really all about. Now, steering of the WRX is precise. There's such good feedback coming through the front wheels. You know exactly what they're doing at all times. Now, this one doesn't have drive modes, like I said. That's reserved for the high-spec models in the lineup. But for a car without drive modes, this thing is brilliant because it, as I said, is really well balanced. Good weight to the steering wheel. It's not too stiff. It's not too light. It's really well set up for a car that would really be a daily driver for most people out there. And even for a weekend car, you do feel like the steering wheel adds to that level of confidence I was talking about before because it's just so well connected. You do feel like you're one with the car. It has 11.2 meter turning circle, so going around a corner is fine, but parking it is also easy because you can maneuver it quite well. I think the steering, suspension, and all-wheel drive system in this car work in perfect harmony to give you the balance, the precision, and performance when it comes to handling. So then we have the engine in the WRX, which is a 2.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder boxer. And that's good enough for 202 kilowatts, 350 Newton meters of torque, and it'll get this thing to 100 in 6 seconds. Now, it is quick. I think the one thing that lets this car down is the fact that the exhaust is so muted. So even though it is quick, you don't necessarily get that sensation of it all the time. I mean, you feel the boost kicking in and it does shove you back into your seat, but I think an exhaust would certainly help this car come a little bit more alive. But I think this car really is about the handling, and 0 to 100 times don't necessarily matter too much because it's not really how quickly you get there in the WRX, it's how you get there. And like I said, this thing is a corner carver. It is so well balanced. Now, speaking of being balanced, the Boxer is also a very well balanced engine. Unlike the inline 4s and V engines out there that have counterweights on the crankshaft to keep them balanced, the Boxer by design doesn't have any of that because it is so well balanced. So the Boxer in this car is brilliant. I think it really is the perfect companion for the WRX. that's really designed to go around corners quite quickly, it helps with that. The one drawback of this engine though is the fuel consumption. 9.9 litres, which is a combined claim number from Subaru. It's not too bad, but compared to modern day standards, it's not the greatest either. But fuel consumption aside, can you have fun with this engine? You absolutely can. The 6-speed manual in the WRX is fantastic. I mean, it's precise, it's sharp, gear changes just notch beautifully into place. It's a bit like changing gears in an arcade game or a driving simulator. It feels fantastic. The clutch pedal's also really well placed, really well balanced. It's progressive in its feel. It's not too soft. It's really not too heavy. It's the perfect balance in between. So the pedal feel is fantastic. Now, where I think the WRX falls short when it comes to transmission is the automatic box that they throw into the high spec models, which is actually a CVT or continuously variable transmission. I don't know why Subaru didn't just throw in a torque converter or a DCT, given the WRX is a performance car. CVTs are no good for performance cars, but that's what they did. So, like I've said throughout this video, I do think the bare bones base model WRX is the way to go, especially considering you get a manual gearbox in it. And sure, you lose some of the convenience features, you lose some of the safety technologies, but if you really want to have fun and enjoy a performance car for what it is, then the base model WRX with the manual is definitely the way to go. And lastly, there's the interior of the WRX. Now, I did mention there's a fair bit of plastic in here, but at the end of the day, this is a Japanese car and there's a certain level of Japanese quality you get from Subaru. And the interior has no creaks, no rattles. It's really well put together. Now, the seats themselves are superb. I mean, the WRX really needs these seats because it is built for cornering and they keep you in place beautifully. And they're also comfortable, to be honest with you. I've been driving this thing around for the last few hours and my back still feels fine. So the seats are brilliant. Good visibility as well in here. There is a little bit of road noise that comes through from the tires and a little bit of wind noise, but can't expect this thing to be as insulated as a European luxury car. It's a WRX after all. And I can't speak highly enough about the infotainment system in this thing. It is absolutely brilliant. I love it. It's intuitive, it's responsive, it's large, it shows you everything that you need to see, and it looks good. So I think this is really one of my favorite infotainment systems now. Absolutely love it, and I think Subaru's done a really good job of putting that into this car right across the range from base model all the way to top spec. So kudos to you, Subaru. Absolutely love the system. So, I was wrong about the new WRX. It's still every bit the Rexy we've loved since 1992 for all the reasons I've given you in this video. And like I said, the base model may not have all the bells and whistles that people look for these days, but what it does offer is a bare bones analog sports car with a manual transmission that's practical, that you can buy today in a world where everything's going digital. Subaru's paid attention to the enthusiasts and purists out there and given the WRX what it needs and just left the rest out. And even if you're not a die-hard WRX fan, you're still going to enjoy being behind the wheel of this sports car because after all, it's a WRX and that's what this car is all about.